Hi guys, it's HulloAlice here with the Paletteful Packs YouTube channel, and I have in front of me the May premiere pack. So let's open it up and see what's inside. Alright, so we've got all this lovely green paper, and underneath are the supplies. So the first thing that I see when I open the box are these Marabou Graphics Aqua inks. These are 15 milliliters and we're going to get 8 colors. And the colors that come in the box are lemon, mint, black, vermilion, cyan, carmine red, magenta, and dark brown. So really great variety of colors here. And these are light, fast, pigment-based watercolor inks. So they have really concentrated colors. They're both naturally transparent and ultra brilliant. So we're gonna get really bright, translucent colors with these. These work well with a brush or even a dip pen, and even when they're dry, the colors can still be dissolved with water to create really interesting effects. So we just need to make sure that we shake these before use. These look so much fun. Watercolors are one of my favorite mediums, so I cannot wait to play around with these. I haven't used very much liquid watercolor before, so I can't wait to try these. Okay, so digging on in, the next thing I see is this guy. So these are graphics Fineliners, and these are also by Marabou. This is a set of 4 black ink pens, and they come in sizes 0.2 millimeters, 0.4 millimeters, 0.8 millimeters, and brush. So let's open this up and pull out the pens and see what they look like. So this is what they look like. They're nice gray pens with black lids. These are water-based and water-soluble, which means they're great for pen and ink washes. Basically, you lay it down, then you use water on a brush to kind of blur the lines and add shading. I am super into this technique right now because it means that you can sketch and then add shading in just an instant. And I love the beautiful, like messy sort of finished but unfinished look that technique adds. So I can't wait to play around with that technique with these. Okay, so I see some brushes in here, so I'm gonna pull these brushes out. All right, so these are the brushes. These are Princeton Velvet Touch brushes, and the Velvet Touch thing is real. That was the first thing. I pulled them out and I was like, ooh, they feel really soft. So they're very comfortable to hold. So this is a size 6 flat shader and a number 3 round. So versatile, a lot of things that you can do with those. These are going to be synthetic brushes, and they each have a unique different kind of blend of synthetic that is unique to their individual shape and style. So those are the paint brushes, and I'm guessing that now we have some paper. So the last thing in here is the paper. This is the Strathmore mixed media paper in the 400 series, which is their best series. I really enjoy the Strathmore mixed media paper, especially the 400 series. It's such a great paper. This is a great mixed media paper, so you can use wet and dry media on it. It includes 15 heavyweight sheets, and it is acid-free and specially sized for wet media performance. So you can use watercolor, gouache, acrylic, graphite, pen and ink, colored pencil, marker, pastel, pretty much anything you want. It's mixed media paper. So I'm going to sketch up some ideas, and then I will be back to try out the supplies. So the first thing that I did, as with all my Paletteful Packs boxes, was test out the supplies. And oh my goodness, these are the most beautiful, pigmented, translucent. They are so fun to work with, and they are so bright. And I will talk a little bit more about the pigments and the inks and how they worked as we go along. But this is me testing out the inks. I made a little rainbow. I wanted to see how they would blend together and what effects I could make with them as they dried, and also how they worked over the inks. Once I had done some testing of the supplies, I moved on to the actual piece. So I drew this girl daydreaming, and I wanted there to be a very bright floral background. One of the things that I wanted to do was really play with the colors that I had available to me because of how pigmented they were. I wanted to be able to use some of the pure colors and drop them in and use a lot of wet on wet techniques. So I decided to draw some tulips because I still miss Amsterdam. I guess I must have had a really fun time there. Now, tulips are just so beautiful, and it's spring, and it just felt like something that would be really, really fun to draw. So I added in these tulips in the background, and the way that I did this was I very, very loosely and messily added in all of these colors in a wet on wet technique, and was able to get some really, really amazing effects on this paper. It is so pretty the way the pigment sits on the paper and the granulation effects that you can achieve with this. It's very unusual, the way that it granulates compared to other watercolors, and you can create some really, really beautiful textures with it. So that's what I did, and then I went over with the ink pens and I defined where the tulips were, the outlines of them. I did like a light sketch beforehand, and then I actually filled in all of the white area, like outside area, with the brush pen so that it was black. So then you just have this textured painting, like underpainting, peeking through the black, which I thought was a really cool effect. It's definitely one that I want to play around with again. This idea of painting in layers and then adding in the black and things, you know, kind of peeking out from underneath it. So I really enjoyed that technique, and I think it came out really cool for the background, and it was a really fun way to play around with some of the effects that you can get with these inks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pens, and then I'll just jump back into the inks after that. But the pens were really, really nice to work with. They were more water resistant than I was expecting them to be, which was kind of nice actually. And I was able to soften the lines a little bit though, but they didn't blur as much as I had originally expected them to, which means that I was able to blend more of the watercolors over the top without things getting too muddy. They did desaturate the watercolors just a little bit, which was actually perfect because I didn't want them to be super like as bright on the figure. So I started out with doing the figure in the lines in the 0.4 millimeter pen, and then I added in some extra lines in the 0.2 millimeter as well. And I did this first so that the lines would soften up a little bit as I added in the ink. And yeah, they were good pens. Not too much more to say about that. So I will talk a little bit more about the inks now and how they blend on the paper. So these inks, as we had mentioned before, they are able to be blended after they've dried, which means they lift really, really easily, which is great for making effects once they're dry. So once they're dry, you can kind of lift parts up and create like, you know, highlights, different mottled effects, and things like that. So that's really, really useful. It does make it a little bit tricky when you're layering them, and that's something that I had to kind of figure out, and I found that the best way to work with these was I really enjoyed working wet on wet. Working wet on wet was really wonderful with these inks, as because they are already so translucent, I could really build up the pigment by dropping in pigment, and I was able to create the most beautiful like spreads and bleeds and blends with it. And I was able to keep some of the more pure color in and have a couple areas of pure color as well, just by dropping that into the water and having it spread out and blend with everything. So I was able to create some kind of cool mottled effect. So in terms of shading the skin and the figure, I went a little overboard with the shading. I started with my normal watercolor technique, which is to fill everything in with the shadows in purple as kind of a base layer or underpainting. And I started doing this out of pure instinct. It's my normal working habits, and this is a place where I think it's important to know that your normal working habits can work against you at times. And I kind of did these underpaintings without really thinking or planning how I really wanted to approach the shading of the figure. And I think that if I had thought it out a little bit more, I might have gone with a little bit of a less shaded look on the figure, but I didn't. And this is what the technique that I approach with, so you can learn from both things that worked for me and things that didn't work for me. So this is where I started to really experiment with how these paints layered on this specific paper. This paper was really, really good for these paints, and the fact that it didn't buckle at all. It stayed really, really sturdy, and it took the paints really nicely, and you were able to create, like I said before, these beautiful textured effects with them. Obviously, these paints were not necessarily made for a smooth blend, and that was where I had a couple tricky issues, but I found that the paints are easiest if you work with them let the layer fully dry, and then you put another layer on top. You can either lift it if you use quite a bit of water, but if you use a little bit less water, you can actually layer up on top of the color, the dry color, a little bit. It doesn't layer up too much before you start pulling up the pigment because you want to be able to make those effects later and lift things up. So it's also really great afterwards to like add in highlights if you want to do that as well. So that's kind of some tips that I picked up for shading with this. If you do want to shade, try to kind of let things dry fully. And also I tried to add in different color variations while it was already wet on wet. So start with a wet on wet layer, kind of get all your colors in, and then go in with maybe one or max 2 layers of shading. I think that if I had shaded a little bit less on this, I would have been a little more happy with the result. I am happy with the result. But I do think that I should have like taken a step back on the shading. Sometimes less is more. For the hair, I wanted it to be really, really vibrant and imitate the colors and textures and techniques that I had used in the tulips in the background. So I used wet on wet again, and I used the yellow, the magenta, I believe it was the carmine red. And I kept that very loose and let everything blend on the paper. And then I did lift up a couple little highlights as well, just laying down that base layer of color as I kind of continued to build and work on layering. For the hair strands, this is kind of where I discovered the technique that I was just talking about how you really want to control how much water you're putting down if you want to layer on top of it. And that's how I was able to get some shading in the hair, which I think turned out really, really nicely, especially with all the different gradients and tones in her hair. One of the last things that I did was I went in with a white Prismacolor pencil to re-add in some of the highlights. I also used my white Posca pen that I got in last month's Paletteful packs to add in some highlights to the eyes. And then I just went around with the 0.8mm pen and touched up the outlines as well. And that's pretty much everything. I hope that you guys enjoyed this demo. I hope that you found it useful and maybe picked up some tips to use with your own watercolor inks in your Paletteful packs. If you're interested in getting your own Premier pack, don't forget to check out the link down in the description box below where you can go and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next month for the next Paletteful packs unboxing and demo. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye!